The Charleston Library Society was founded in 1748, which makes it the third oldest circulating library in the United States and the oldest cultural institution of any kind in the South. It was originally founded by 19 young men here in Charleston as a way to get books and publications shipped to them from London. They kind of collected together, pooled their resources. It became one of the most important cultural institutions in town very quickly. It helped found the College of Charleston. It directly founded the Charleston Museum, which is America's first museum. It became a center for learning. The many early natural historians, Bachman, Audubon, Andre Michaud, set up camp here in Charleston, and the Library Society was kind of their home base, so it was an early center for science and learning in the colony. Most of the founding fathers from South Carolina, signers of the Constitution, signers of the Declaration of Independence, were all Library Society members on our board, very active members, plenty of them. We have lots of their letters and papers in our collection today. So these are a handful of letters that we have that are from George Washington, this entire series of correspondences with Charles Cotesworth Pinckney. And time again, Washington tried to recruit Pinckney to serve in the new national government. This is from 1791, and this is a letter to Pinckney and his friend Edward Rutledge asking if they would join the Supreme Court. Rutledge's brother had just kind of gotten borked from the court, and Washington basically says, you won't be paid anything, you won't get a lot of respect, but if either of you two guys would like to come up here and be Supreme Court justices, we'd love to have you. It would be a great addition to the court. Neither of them did. They were happy to stay here and keep maintenance on their crops, which was much more profitable and probably much more enjoyable than moving north in their opinion. He again asked Pinckney if he would become Secretary of War a few years later. He asked him if he would become Secretary of State. The year after that, Pinckney says no dice. And finally, 1796, he says, Charles, you've turned down every other job I've offered you. How about Minister of France? And our executive director likes to joke that it was probably his wife influencing this decision. Paris, yes, absolutely. So Charles Cotesworth Pinckney finally responded with a positive answer to Washington and became the Minister to France. Kind of a funny series of letters. There's another great one that from the Pinckney correspondence. He was friends with John Marshall, which is interesting. Pinckney was a hardcore Federalist, and when during the early 19th century, Jefferson swept the South. South Carolina went for Jefferson. It joined the early Democratic Republicans, but her original founding fathers remained heavily Federalist. And so there's this great letter from John Marshall, which I'll sheet and read a little bit off of the transcript, that they talk about some of their old contacts together, and Marshall says, the new political year is here, Mr. Jefferson will be inaugurated soon, and then the letter stops. There's this break at 4 o'clock, which you can see in the letter. That 4 o'clock break, he stops, and then he goes back to write, I've administered the oath to the president. This is actually his inauguration day letter, and before and after the inauguration itself, he's complaining about how terrible a President Jefferson will be. But anyhow, comes back to finish off the letter. And one more from Pinckney, which is kind of entertaining. Pinckney was also good friends with that chief Federalist, with Alexander Hamilton. And this is 1802. The Federalists have been run out of office. This is the end of 1802. Jefferson is soon to be president. And Hamilton writes to Pinckney. Pinckney's got a big plantation down here, and says, my dear sir, a garden, as you know, is a very usual refuge of a disappointed politician. This is Hamilton saying he's going to retire from public life, which of course he didn't do, but he's asking Pinckney to send him seeds. He had just bought a new plantation house of his own in New York. He was going to plant a garden, set up shop, and forget about politics, which is, we all know how Alexander Hamilton wound it up. Maybe he would have been better if he just retired to his garden. A few other things from the collection. Let's see. There's John Drayton's view of Carolina. We've got a lot of things from the early colonies that are of national importance, but it is a Charleston institution. It's a South Carolina institution, and so there are some great documents. This is the original manuscript copy, and you can see the shape it's in. We're absolutely open to conservation donations. This is the original manuscript copy of John Drayton's view of Carolina. John Drayton was one of the first governors of the early Republican period in South Carolina, and much the same as Thomas Jefferson's famous Notes on Virginia, Drayton drove all around South Carolina by carriage, checking things out, surveying everything, taking useful social statistics, and tried to come up with a scientific and geographic view of what South Carolina really was. And in a lot of ways, Drayton was fundamental in founding the University of South Carolina, and a lot of this book would be his argument that South Carolina needed a centralized capital. Drayton would go on to be one of the founders of Columbia. So this manuscript was kind of his foundational document. Let's see, there are, in mixed condition, there's a whole handful of great maps in here. There's his map of Charleston at the time, which this would have been 1802. But this book is his survey of exactly what the young South Carolina, the state of South Carolina, is, and the whys and wherefores of moving its capital. It's a fairly interesting document. And for just a little bit of our 20th century collection, the Charleston Renaissance of the 1920s, which produced DuBose Hayward and Porgy, Josephine Pinckney, plenty of notable writers here in the Charleston area, the foundation of the Poetry Society. A lot of that took place here at the Library Society. They all would have been members. This was the only library in town until the 1930s, so this was their library, this was their hangout. And this is the original manuscript copy of Porgo. This is the handwritten first draft with all of DuBose Hayward's side notes in it, all of his little annotations, and most notably his dialect charts. Gullah now is pretty universally held as its own dialect, as its own language, as having proper constructions. At the time it wasn't, but DuBose Hayward, when you see him writing in it, is always sensitive to try and be consistent, to try and acknowledge, which when you read Porgy, and then when you see it in its supreme form, when it finally becomes Porgy and Bess, which he wrote a lot of the libretto to, you can tell he is immersed in the language, that he knows his Gullah and he treats it respectfully. And here's kind of the foundation of that, is he tries to make sure that even he is consistent, that he keeps the rhythms, the names, the spellings, the pronunciations the same throughout the work. Today we still exist as kind of a hybrid institution. We have many things like a historical society. We have that great core historical collection which we've kept for over 250 years. But we're also a circulating library. There are dime novels, there's Dan Brown novels, there's books on tape. We're people's neighborhood library. So it's an interesting place for people to be able to work very high levels of history and culture that are always on display in with their daily lives. There's not a lot of places you can go to pick up a cheap dime novel or a DVD to watch over the weekend. And when you go to the front desk, there's also a George Washington letter sitting there, and people get to stop and read it. So it's a great way that you kind of get history in your life every day as a Library Society member.